Drill instructors and drill sergeants are Reddit. What's the funniest thing you've seen a recruit do that you couldn't laugh at? Story 1. Had a soldier one time stop mountain climbers while we were being smoked as a platoon. DS comes up and squats down, yells in his face why he stopped. Recruit yells back, "This soldier has made it to the top of the mountain, drill sergeant." Dude just walked away, trying not to break with laughter. Story 2. Never having been a drill sergeant, when I was in U.S. Army Infantry School in 2004, we were taking showers when one of the drills walked in and called us to toe the line. But when I got out of the shower, I discovered that someone had stolen my PT uniform and towel. So I grabbed my shaving cream and covered my private area in cream and then walked out to my bunk. The drill sergeant approached me, asking what the hell I thought I was doing. I told him that my clothes and towel were gone, so I did the next best thing. He responded by saying, "You know what? You're going to do all right in the infantry." Story 3. I was never a drill instructor, but I can pass along a classic boot camp story. I was in the Navy, and in the Navy, your final inspection as a division is before the division officer, usually a junior officer. However, before our inspection, one of our RDCs, what we call the DI in the Navy, found a locker out of order and decided to discipline us in our dress blues. It was not a pleasant experience with wool uniforms and the possibility of getting beaten even more if we lost our cover. During the inspection, the division officer walked up to the first guy in formation and he puked. But this guy was a genius. He puked down the t-shirt in his dress blues, saving the DO from getting puked on and us from getting beat even more. The division officer was so impressed with his military bearing that he called the inspection right then and there and gave us all a perfect score. We still got beaten that night, but dang, that guy was a hero. Story 4. Not me, but I had a great team sergeant who had a quote-unquote floater, a wonky eye, that he was blind in due to an injury in Iraq. One eye worked fine, but the other one had a mind of its own. He was a physically imposing man with a classic drill sergeant voice, and his crazy eye only added to his presence. He once told a story about his time as a drill sergeant when he found two privates sitting down on fire watch being very lackadaisical about their duties. He started giving them the business in a classic full metal jacket style. Finally, he was about to smoke them for who knows how long when one of the offending privates asked, "Drill sergeant, are you yelling at us or the water fountain?" This stopped him dead in his tracks and he just walked away mid-knife. Story 5. We weren't allowed to talk during chow at the galley. Recruits had to point at what they wanted and another recruit had to silently pass it to them. One recruit wanted a napkin and pointed to it. The other recruit asked, "This?" Immediately the CCs, the Coast Guard DS, came over, circling him like sharks and screaming at him. They made him put 10 saltines in his mouth and chew until his mouth was full, then asked the first recruit if he wanted a napkin again. He barely could get it out and was spitting pieces of cracker everywhere. Then they screamed at the first recruit to answer him, but we were all silently cracking up. It sounded like this. Few pieces of saltine flying out. They kept yelling, "Answer him!" while we were all cracking up and almost crying. Finally, the first recruit answered, "No, thank you." It was the best. Story 6. I was a super light sleeper during basic training. One night I woke up for no reason. The sleeping bay was dark except for the light by the desk where the two soldiers on fire guard were supposed to be awake and alert. Both of them were leaning back in their chairs, dead asleep. I started to throw my covers off to go wake them up. If a drill sergeant came through and caught the fire guard sleeping, we would all pay. But then I heard a slow scraping sound to my right, off in the darkness. I froze and heard it again, closer. A few heartbeats later, I almost screamed out loud as I saw the sharp, intense face of our Samoan drill sergeant in the darkness. His face was covered in full camo, and he was low crawling underneath the line of bunk beds toward the fire guard. He had a bayonet between his teeth. So we locked eyes, and he silently raised one finger to his mouth, signaling for silence. I nodded and sat back to watch the show as the drill sergeant resumed his low crawl under and passed my bunk in the direction of the sleeping guards. I have a bunch of stories of funny stuff I did to correct soldiers when I later became a non-commissioned officer, but that image, like something straight out of an 80s war movie, will always stick with me. Story 7. In Navy boot camp, forced PT is called beatings and drill instructors are called RDCs, recruit division commanders. One day while standing in ranks, the RDC was asking random trivia questions about a test that the recruits had taken to ensure that they had been studying. So he got to a guy who was eccentric, to say the least. The RDC asked a question and the guy got it wrong, so the RDC yelled, "Nope, wrong, beat yourself." Literally everyone knew that meant start doing push-ups, so the expectation was that he would start doing push-ups as the RDC moved to the next guy to ask a question. Now, I was standing across from the guy, and he had a confused look on his face. He looked at his own hand for like 5 seconds, then hauled off and slapped himself in the face. It made a loud crack sound, and I cracked and chuckled myself, trying to keep my composure at attention. The RDC looked at me, then realized why I laughed, and it had to do with the slapping sound. So he turns back to the self-slapping guy and asked him if he slapped himself. The guy said, "You told me to beat myself, sir." Cue the entire barracks cracking up. It was a single moment during boot camp where the curtain was raised and a moment of unadulterated levity came over everyone. The RDC couldn't stop laughing, so the tough guy ass persona melted away for a good 60 seconds until he regained composure and made all of us do push-ups. The push-ups were an easy price to pay for that moment. Story 8. In my basic training class, I was a squad leader, which is essentially a person who does extra chores. Anyway, for some reasons unknown, myself and the other squad leaders were doing push-ups in the drill sergeant's office. Now, when doing these push-ups, you eventually reach muscle failure, so you just hang out there in the front, leaning rest, and try to bust out another push-up every few seconds or so. We were all in there, dying, and the drill sergeant says to one of my buddies, "Private Hudson, tell me what's the difference between basic training and being in prison?" Without missing a beat, Private Hudson says, "Drill Sergeant, in prison, they get to watch TV." The drill sergeant cracked a little bit of a smile and then told us to get up and get out of there. Story 9. This is a story from my time as a recruit in Navy boot camp. We had an inspection the following day, and our chief was going around checking everyone's rack to make sure it was squared away. He eventually made it to my section and was inspecting the rack beside mine. He had it propped open so I couldn't see his face and kind of forgot he was there. While he was searching through the guy's stuff, he saw his small gloves and asked, "You know what they say about small gloves?" Now, keep in mind that I don't think of any of my RDCs had heard me talk until this point. Without any hesitation, I replied, "I know that's not true. I wear a size 12 boot, but I can tell you right now, I do not have a size 12 My chief slammed the rack shut and looked at me, shouting, "What the F?" He then stormed off into the fishbowl, and all you could hear was him trying to hold back his laughter in the office with the 2 petty officers. Story 10. There was a recruit in my basic training class who, after firing his rifle, had it up on his shoulder, pointing in the wrong direction towards the drill sergeant who was clearing it, and the magazine was still in. The drill sergeant, who was a 6'8" bodybuilder, slammed the recruit into the sandbags and screamed at him. Then the recruit had to lay prone in the dirt holding a stick for a rifle and periodically saying bang for the next 3 or 4 hours. Somehow, he still graduated with us. Story 11. I wasn't a drill sergeant myself, but I served in 2005, and we had a guy in our unit who claimed to be the 7th generation Army from a family of high-ranking officers. It turned out he was lying about his parents' ranks. They were just E6 and E7. He was obviously trying to compensate for something. On his first night, he cried all night long. On the second night, the drill sergeant made all of us stand around his bunk and chant until he fell asleep. We all knew that anyone who signs up for the military knows they're going to be away from their family, so this guy was obviously a lost cause. But the point of my story is what happened one day when we were walking to the chow hall. The drill sergeant was being really nice and chatting with us, answering questions about deployments and AIT, and suddenly this guy decides to run up and snatch the drill sergeant's hat and run away with it. For those who don't know, a drill sergeant's hat is not something you mess with. Drill sergeants go through additional training, similar to basic training, to earn that hat. So this guy's actions were a major sign of disrespect. The drill sergeant talked for a few more seconds, then suddenly stopped as a situation sunk in. His eyes went wide with shock as he raised his hand and passed it over his head from front to back. I was right in front of him, and I saw his demeanor change from nice guy to someone who looked like he wanted to kill the guy who took his hat. The drill sergeant takes off after the private, who didn't even know how to run despite being from a long line of soldiers. The drill sergeant caught up to him in no time flat, and we heard some hilarious sounds as they rolled down a hill. The drill sergeant carefully put his hat back on and looked at us. "Who saw what happened?" he demanded. No one dared to respond. "Okay, you have permission to laugh for exactly 10 seconds. Then we're going to get some chow, I'm going to have someone pick up Private No Nuts, and then you're all going to give a statement. The absolute truth." As a side note, we later found out that the guy had been recycled so many times during basic training that he was sent to RHC. I forget what it stands for, but we all refer to it as Return to Home Company, while he was being processed for a less than honorable discharge. His parents had convinced the higher-ups to take their time so he could learn a lesson. Good times. Story 12. On day 2 of basic training at Lackland AFB, my flight returned with our newly issued gear after having our heads shaved and completing other hurry up and wait tasks. Our TI told us to go upstairs and stand at attention by our beds. We ran up there, tired, after attempting to march what felt like 2 miles each way in the August Texas heat. We all stood there waiting for whatever was going to happen next. And after about 5 minutes, Donnie Barnes said, "Sergeant Gates is an ass. Am I right?" And you would not believe what happened next. As soon as Barnes said Gates, the locker directly behind Barnes popped open with a creak. Barnes froze, solid. Out of the locker popped one leg after another, and then came 3 taps as Sergeant Gates walked out of the locker and put his mouth directly next to Barnes' ear, shouting in his gravelly voice, "On your face!" We did so many push-ups. Story 13. Early in boot camp at MCRDSD, we were post-shower and standing at attention for the hygiene inspection, wearing nothing but skivvies and t-shirts. The drill instructor, DI, was walking the line checking fingernails and other things when one private's ear flopped out of his skivvies right as the DI passed him. The DI stopped, looked the private in the eye and said, "Private, I don't even like you, much less like you that way. Now put that goddamn thing away before it goes off." The private in question turned purple with embarrassment and tried to stuff his back in his skivvies, but was getting flustered as the DI started yelling at him for being an incompetent private. The DI said that if he didn't get it stowed in 3 seconds, the private would be taking a 10-minute cold shower. The DI said things like, "Do I have to hose you down like an excited chihuahua? Should I call the vet? Good God, private, is that how you greet your mother at night? Stow your gear, goddammit." Every other private in line was trying not to laugh, and the senior drill instructor, SDI, had retreated to his office where we could hear him howling with laughter. The private finally got his erection stowed, and the DI resumed inspection, but we could see that he was trying his damnedest not to bust out laughing. No one got much sleep that night because there were too many gigglers in their bunks and too many quiet one-liners. Story 14. Not a DS, but I went to Army Basic. I was in the chow line, standing closely behind the guy in front of me, when suddenly I felt one of my drill sergeants breathing down my neck over the separation wall. He yelled, "Shia LaBeouf, who is your daddy?" To which I responded, "You are, drill sergeant." My other DS quickly came over and asked, "Oh yeah? What does that make me then?" And all I could come up with was, "My mommy, drill sergeant." The entire chow hall erupted in laughter, and I ended up getting smoked outside. I have plenty more stories that are equally as funny or possibly even funnier. When I was in AIT to become a medic at Fort Sam, we had to toe the line for bed check. This meant standing on a yellow line by our bunks in PTs and shower shoes, holding our ID cards with our tags hanging out. We used to mess with each other a lot in our bay, and right before toe to line, one of my buddies hid one of my shower shoes, so I was in a rush and thinking, "Oh no, I'll just wear the one." So as I stood there at half attention in one flip-flop, my bare foot tucked away behind me, our cadre came up to do the bed check. He looked directly down at my feet, crossed his arms, and said, "Shia LaBeouf, what in the Sam F are you doing?" All I could say was, "Sergeant, I couldn't find my other shower shoe for bed check." I think he had been waiting for this moment because he started to smirk and then yelled, "God damn it, Shia LaBeouf, you are more ate up than a chocolate dick in a gay bar," which triggered giggles and snickers throughout the bay. Thankfully, our school cadre were a lot more chill than drill sergeants. Story 15. I wasn't a drill instructor, but I do have a funny story from my time in basic training. It was the birthday of one of our fellow trainees, a guy named Goldberg, and we happened to be heading to the gas chamber that day for a taste of crowd control gas. During the morning briefing, the training instructor asked if there were any questions, and Goldberg raised his hand and said, "Sir, don't you think it's a little messed up to send a Jew to the gas chamber on his birthday?" We all cracked up, including our TI, but the story doesn't end there. Later at breakfast in the dining facility, our TI shouted, "Trainee Goldberg, why don't you tell the other TIs what you told me this morning?" With a straight face, Goldberg repeated his comment. "Oh, I was just telling our TI how it's pretty messed up that the Air Force is sending a Jew to the gas chamber on his birthday." All the TIs at the long table fell silent, almost looking scared, while our TI burst out laughing so hard that everyone else stopped laughing. Despite being a muscular 6'2", Goldberg was the funniest guy in our flight. He now owns a few gyms in his home state. What an awesome guy. Story 16. I'll never forget this one. Whenever a recruit would fart, we would make them turn on the vacuum cleaner. Now this meant that we would yell, "Who the f just farted? This recruit is attempting to attack our olfactory sense. Platoon, turn on the vacuum." And this would be followed by, "Turn on the vacuum, aye aye, sir." And then all the recruits would suck in through their mouths as hard as they could. However, one time we had a recruit who immediately answered when we asked who farted, This recruit farted, sir. It turned out that recruit Jones had farted during a late-night drill session in third phase. By then, recruits are disciplined and almost always put the mission first, even if that mission is just executing left-face march, without asking to go to the head. Poor kid sat in his own filth for almost 2 hours. Story 17. Not a DI, but when I went through basic training, they gave everyone a flashlight with a lime green yellow thing on the bright end that you had to have with you in the morning for PT. So one individual forgot his and didn't say anything until we walked over to the PT pad. The TI began to berate him and called him a dumbass, telling him to run back to the bunks to retrieve the flashlight. Before he left, the TI yelled, "If anyone stops you, just tell them you are a dumbass." However, another TI across the street saw him running back to the bunks and started laying into him. We could all hear him on the PT pad until the trainee got a chance to respond with, "Sir, trainee so-and-so reports as ordered, I am a dumbass." The TI walked away without saying anything. I have another story about this exact airman. Near the end of basic training, depending on your TI, you might get what is called an amnesty hour. It's everyone who has been in basic with you and your TI basically talking to you like a normal person again. Well, our TI opened the floor for questions, and the first kid to raise his hand was the same kid who forgot his Lackland laser. Now, during all of basic, there was a rumor going around that a TI had posed for Playboy. Now, it was a rumor, but no one could go on a computer to Google it because it's BMT. The airman stood up and asked, with a straight face, "Sir, is it true a TI posed for Playboy?" Our TI laughed and confirmed the rumor. The airman then asked, "Sir, did you meet this TI?" Our TI responded with, "No, but if I did, I would be tapping that." And without missing a beat, this short, skinny kid from Tennessee said, "Thank you for not hitting it so that the rest of us don't fall in it." I cried laughing. Story 18. A pair of battle buddies were late to formation. Everyone was lined up waiting for them to get dressed, and they ran down about 3 seconds apart from each other, which was a big mistake. The first one runs out, and the drill sergeant screams, "Freeze, motherfucker! Aren't you supposed to have someone with you?" Without skipping a beat, the private replied, "The force is always with me, drill sergeant." After thinking about it for a sec, the drill sergeant told the private to shut up and fall in line. His buddy, meanwhile, had made his way outside and was trying, poorly, to sneak into line. The drill sergeant saw the private sneaking in and yelled, "Well, now hold on a sec. Who's this friggin' big shot over here walking around like he owns a place? You the new top? You think you're special?" The private replied, "No, drill sergeant, I'm the force." Everyone, including the lead drill, lost their frickin' minds for 2 seconds. Story 19. Had 2 guys get in a fight in our bay during basic. Drill sergeant made them hold hands and pretend to be on a date all week. Only time they could let go of each other's hands was rack time. They ended up becoming pretty good friends.